Salutations, Niaja. It's me, Mommy. I just want to reach out to you. It's been a little while. You see, my hair is different. Well, actually, it's only been like 4 days since I made the last video, but I am making a new video for you. Hopefully, you'll have an opportunity to watch it. Today is January 6th, 2020, which is all information I hadn't been given previously because I wasn't certain when you would watch it. But either way, today is actually your Auntie Shayna's birthday. So, but either way, today, this is a video that I attempted to do. I attempted to do it a few days ago, but I wasn't feeling so well. So I put it off and I figured I would do it. I would do it when I was feeling a little bit better. So hopefully we'll get through it just fine and I will not yawn again. But I miss you. I miss you a lot. So we've been talking about the civil rights movement and we've gotten a lot of information. So what we're going to do today is kind of take a look at a timeline. Now, a timeline is effective to teach you about what? Chronological order or sequence. Chronological order means that things are going in sequence, meaning they're going in line with the way they happened. Because sometimes it's just like, sometimes when you're describing to me how you bake the cake, you always start with what? First, I got my ingredients, right? You don't say, well, first I baked the cake. The proper chronological order says, first, I have to get my ingredients. Once I have my ingredients, I'm able to then mix them together. Once I mix them together, I can put them in the pan and either cook them on the stove or put them in the oven, right? Exactly. You're right. You're so bright. So now what this does is this is the chronological order of the civil rights movement, or the chronology of the civil rights movement. So that means there's two pertinent points. Well, there are three pertinent points. One, this is the title of the document right here. So it's the civil rights timeline. And then next to each date, now timelines can come in all kinds of ways. They can be a month, it can be years, it can be centuries, it can be decades, all kind of increments of time. This particular timeline uses years, okay? The years are here in red, okay? And then next to the year is a key fact, okay? And again, we're looking at this book, Civil Rights Leaders, Inspiring African American Civil Rights Leaders, okay? And this is the same book we've been, the last few videos have been from, okay? So again, the title is at the top, okay? And down the side are the years, okay? And next to each year is a key fact. And I'm not certain if your dad got to the library and was able to check the book out for you, but even if he wasn't, I'm going to read it to you. And you got to put your best listening ears on. Do you have them on? Can you put them on now? Good job. I already know you're doing it because you're so intelligent. Okay? You're a beautiful black scholar. You're young, talented. You're young, gifted, and talented. So, my brilliant child, I'm not worried that you got those listening ears on and you're ready to do the assignment. So I'm going to, and remember, at any point, if you need to pause the video, you can do so that you can think about something important, or if you need to rewind it so you can hear it again, certainly please feel free to do so. Okay? All right. So we're taking a look. All right. So this is the way it looks. Okay? All right. So now we're going to get started. Okay? All right. So as we discussed before, in 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, declaring that all slaves in states supporting Confederacy are now free. So remember, the United States was divided between the Union and the Confederacy. That occurred during the Civil War because the southern states, which were considered the Confederacy, they wanted to have people be slaves. Is that a good choice? No, of course not. So they wanted to have Southerners, they wanted to have slaves. The Union, which were the northern states, said, that's no good. We would like to support industry. And They were ready to start the Industrial Revolution. But in order to do so, they had to stop slavery in the South. And so they fought a big war. And at the end of that war, that's when Abraham Lincoln came in and said, hey, we're going to do stuff differently in the United States. We're going to we're going to stop the southern states from having slaves. And so that's what that choice was all about. Okay? And that occurred in what year? That's correct. In 1863. So in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the what? Where? Emancipation Proclamation. Okay? So say it again. In 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. One more time. In 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which was essentially one of the first steps, one of the first major decisions of the what we now know as the Civil Rights Movement. Okay? Now, in 1895, Booker T. Washington gives his Atlanta Compromise speech. Do you remember we talked about that? And Booker T. Washington was like, well, maybe African Americans need to kind of stay out of politics, focus on developing a trade. And if they do so, maybe some of the people that have been giving black people a hard time saying like, hey, you don't deserve to be free. You still need to be a slave. Maybe those people would stop making those kind of choices. Well, he gave the speech saying that, providing that philosophy in 1895. So in 1895, Booker T. Washington gives his Atlanta Compromise speech. Okay? Then in 1903, can you say that? 1903. That was a long time ago, I know. In 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois publishes The Souls of Black Folk, rejecting the compromise. So in 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois publishes The Souls of Black Folk, rejecting the compromise. Okay? In 1909, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People is formed. Do you remember what the acronym is? Do you remember? National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. So an acronym takes the first letter of each word, okay, and puts it together. All right? So N, National, A, Association, A, for the, okay, so the other words are in there, but it's for the, A, advancement of, C, colored, P, people, okay? So National Association for the Advancement of Colored People was founded in 1909. Guess who helped out with that? Do you remember? Well, maybe not. W.E.B. Du Bois. W.E.B. Du Bois helped start this organization, the NAACP. Okay, so then in 1910, the National Urban League is formed. And remember, there were a lot of different organizations that were working together to give black people their freedom. Blacks in America, their freedom. So remember, it doesn't matter that their names were different. They had different jobs within the portion, so within the movement. So you remember like when you went to school or when you go to school, and your teacher has different helpers. Your teacher has a helper that leads the line. She has a helper that's the caboose or at the end of the line and makes sure everybody gets to where they need to go. She has a helper that helps put the books out. She has a helper that picks up the homework. She has a helper that takes the attendance down. So when she has all of those, the reason why she has different helpers is because each job is different. So there are a number of different organizations that had to work together in order to achieve the goal of what? That's right. We needed to really live out and make sure that black people had the opportunity to experience the truth of the Constitution, in which it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. So that means that all people, all human beings are created equal. Okay? So that's in 1909. Then, in 1910. I apologize. We were talking about the National Urban League. But now, in 1941, A. Philip Randolph organizes the March on Washington movement in January. In 1941, A. Philip Randolph organizes the March on Washington movement in January. In 1941, A. Philip Randolph organizes the March on Washington movement in January. Okay, so that happened when? In 1941. Okay, so that's incredibly important. So now, in 1942, James Farmer and others formed the Committee of Racial Equality, CORE, in April. So in April of 1942, James Farmer and others formed the Committee of Racial Equality. Okay, so that's CORE. All right, so let's look. So we have now, so far, we have the NAACP, we have the Urban League, and we have CORE, three organizations that are working together. And so, even with A. Philip Randolph, the March on Washington movement in January, that's the same march or the same organization that produced the march where Martin Luther King came to deliver his "I Have a Dream" speech. So you can see the legacy of fighting for freedom was long and involved. It didn't just happen one day. So that means what? Change does what? Change takes time. Okay? Change takes time. All right, so that's why when we talk about delaying our gratification, and sometimes we have to be patient and wait a little bit longer than we'd like to. Sometimes we have to do that, and it's really, really important. Okay? All right, so now let's look. So in 1947, CORE organizes the Journey of Reconciliation. CORE organizes the Journey of Reconciliation. What year was that? 1947. Okay, in 1947. Then, in 1948, Malcolm X joins the Nation of Islam while in prison. So, in 1948, the leader we now know as El Hajj Malik Shabazz joined the Nation of Islam, and it happened while he was in prison. So, guess what? He made a bad choice. He had to go to prison. However, while he was there, he joined an organization that changed his life and changed the trajectory of his legacy. And so that occurred in 1948. That started in 1948. Then this is a biggie. We've talked about it several times. In 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, rules on May 17th that separate facilities in education are unequal. Thurgood Marshall argued the case for Brown. So that was the story about the fact. Remember, I told you when African American children or black children couldn't go to school with white children, and they said that it was okay. Nope. There are a lot of people who didn't agree. That's what we were fighting for with regard to civil rights. And so finally, Thurgood Marshall went before the highest court. That means the highest judge, the most important people to interpret the law. And he argued the case and he won. He was successful. So that was in 1954. And so the Supreme Court ruled that separate is not equal. And we have to start doing things differently in the United States because what? All human beings have the right to live freely. Okay? And all human beings are created equal. Okay? How are we doing so far? Are you still with me? Okay, I know it's a lot of information. All right. We're going to the next page. It's quite a bit, but we're going to continue. And again, remember, on a timeline, we have the date or the time, and we also have next to it a pertinent fact. Okay, we have a pertinent fact here. Okay, so let's see. In 1955, Rosa Parks is arrested in Montgomery, Alabama for refusing to give up her seat on the bus to a white passenger on December 1st. Remember we talked about that? What's the name that they've given Rosa Parks? That's right, she's called the mother of the civil rights movement because she made a very important choice. And remember we talked about civil disobedience? Okay, she wasn't trying to make a bad choice because she wasn't a good person. She made a choice to disobey a law that wasn't fair in the first place because it required that people be mistreated in order for it to be enforced. So it wasn't fair for black people not to be able to sit wherever they wanted to on the bus. So for that reason, in 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat and she had to go to jail. Now, she wasn't put in prison for a really long time. Someone bailed her out, but she did have to be fingerprinted. And so that was the thing. So it was a purposeful and deliberate choice in order to ensure that the civil rights movement got the attention it needed so that some more laws can be changed. Okay? So that was in 1955, on December 1st, 1955. So then in 1956, on December 20th, oh, that's right, So after she refused to give up her seat, what was that political strategy they used? It starts with a B. It starts with a B. What did they do? Do you remember? Well, down in Alabama, they boycotted the buses. They boycotted, meaning when you boycott, it means you refuse to use a particular good or service in order to prove a point. Okay, so they boycotted the bus. They boycotted the buses, and guess what? The city started losing a lot of money because they really depended on black passengers, the fares that the black passengers paid in order to make money. So that kind of forced them to make a decision. Okay, and again, it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional. So that's just like separate but equal. Separate but equal focus specifically on education. This is saying segregation laws. So you had separate but equal, you had segregation, and Jim Crow. Those are all synonyms for the policy in the South, or for the United States policy that made it okay for people to be treated differently just based on the color of their skin. So people like Martin Luther King, El Haj Malik Shabazz, A. Philip Randolph, all of those people were really working hard. Um, later on, Jesse Jackson, W.E.B. Du Bois, even Booker T. Washington, because even though in the beginning his philosophy wasn't widely accepted, he established a school that educated a lot of African American people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to go to college. So it's really, really important that we know our history and know what some of these great leaders did, because it really changed it changed the trajectory of what the African American experience could be here in the United States. All right, so let's see. Let's keep going. In 1957, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. That's another organization. So we've talked about CORE, we've talked about NAACP, we talked about the National Urban League. Now we're talking about the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and it was formed by Ralph Abernathy and Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, so that was a really, really important choice, and it was a big decision, because what he did is, what they were able to do is to have another organization that also spoke to the moral imperative. Now, what is a moral imperative? It's those things like sometimes you want to make a bad choice, but you're like, God would be really, really angry. So there were a lot of people who needed to buy into this movement that didn't necessarily feel compelled politically. But when Martin Luther King started telling them, you're not making a good choice, God would not be pleased. They started saying like, okay, hold on, maybe we can help you out a little bit. And so they started working with Martin Luther King as well, and that gave the movement more momentum in order to get the changes needed get some of the changes that were needed. Okay, so that's why it's really important. So again, that's the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. All right, so then let's look again. In 1961, the Congress of Racial Equality, what's that? Congress of Racial Equality, that's CORE, led by James Farmer, organizes a series of freedom rides to desegregate transportation facilities in the South. Let's listen to that again. In 1961, Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, led by James Farmer, organizes a series of freedom rides to desegregate transportation facilities in the South. Why is that important? Because again, we are trying to kick that old Jim Crow out of here, right? Because Jim Crow was making choices. Jim Crow was making it okay for people to make choices that didn't please God and didn't make people feel very good. Okay, so every time they said, "Oh, well, wait a minute, you're black. Oh, wait a minute, you're white. You can't be here. You can't be here," it wasn't really fair. That means that you couldn't have been friends with Giselle. That means that Noelle wouldn't have the mom that she had or she has. So all of those kind of things. And so those are some of the things that they were really fighting against, okay? So this particularly was saying like, okay, so the freedom rides, one of the things that they were also trying to do is get people to be able to vote. You remember when when after President Barack Obama, he was getting ready to leave office and it was time for a new president. And I was talking to you about having to vote and being able to go and make our decision and tell people what, make it clear. So that's called voting. And you cast a ballot. But there was a time where they made it very difficult. If you had black skin, your vote, you weren't able to vote, or they made it very difficult for you to be able to vote. They had all kind of tests and stuff you have to pass and all this kind of stuff for you to exercise your constitutional right to help decide who should run our country and who should make decisions on our behalf. Does that sound fair? No. It's kind of like sometimes I have to make choices, and you kind of like, well, mommy, like I told you you can't have your dessert. And you're like, well, mommy, that's not fair. Okay, so sometimes I have to make an executive decision. But sometimes we can talk about it. And I allow you to be able to tell me, well, mommy, I don't want to lose my ice cream. Is there something else I can do? And I'm like, well, if you change your choice, you can earn your ice cream back. Well, the way things were going in the United States, when we made mistakes or when something came up that needed to be changed, they wouldn't let us say anything. We weren't able to say anything because we couldn't vote and we couldn't get involved politically. And so that's why people were fighting so hard to say, that's not fair. We have to change that choice, okay? And so we have to change that law so that we can exercise our right to choose who speaks on our behalf. And not only that, we can start being able to rally and support candidates that more closely look at our interests and what we need, okay? So that was a really important choice. So then, this is a big one. We listened to this speech last year. In 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gives his I Have a Dream speech to 250,000 people at Lincoln Memorial during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Okay, so then, remember A. Philip Randolph started the March on Washington movement? So then Martin Luther King, with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, later was able to come in and say, hey, they were able to rally 250,000 people. People came in buses and in droves from all over the country to come to Washington at the Lincoln Memorial, on the Washington Mall, at the Lincoln Memorial, on the Washington Mall, for people to be able to say, hey, we want to see some changes, especially economic empowerment. Because guess what? It was very difficult for black people to do what they needed to do if they weren't able to have money, right? Remember we talked about the Great Migration and how some sharecroppers, and after the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation, many African Americans began to move north in order to work in the factories so that they can get jobs. Even still, there still was not enough, they still weren't making enough to really make ends meet in order for their families to thrive in the United States. So it was like, we just don't need equal political rights, we need equal economic opportunity. Okay, we need equal economic opportunity. So that's what Martin Luther King was talking about. He was like, how can our children do what they need to do? No, 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 no. I want children, I want black children, white children, all children to be able to sit down at the same table and have the same opportunities. So in some senses, it was literal, like I want everyone at the same table. But in other times, he was like, yeah, we all have common experiences. Your toe hurts, her toe hurts. She has a headache, she gets headaches, you get headaches. So we all want to be, but when she gets a headache, she can go to the hospital because her parents have insurance. But when she gets a headache, she doesn't get to go to the hospital because her parents don't have the job that pay the insurance. So he said, wait a minute, that's not fair. Everyone should have the same thing, or at least equitable, because sometimes it's not the same. Somebody has to have a little bit more because there was an injustice in the past, and so that's what equity is: equity and equality. So right now we're in a phase of society where we're dealing with equity, but at this time they were just saying, "Hey, we need things to be equal because we are being mistreated." Okay, so now. Also in 1963, John Lewis was elected chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So there we go. there's another organization. So the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was some of those people who had been working with Martin Luther King and they were working with this particular woman named Ella Baker. So as they began to work, and they were also working with Stokely Carmichael, as they were working, they started saying like, wait a minute, we don't feel like our voices are being heard as well because we're students and we're young. But guess what? We have a vision, and we believe in the vision as we believe in equal rights as well, and we'd like our voices to be heard. And so in that, they established SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Now with SNCC, what they did, a lot of what they did is they did sit-ins. So just like you have boycotts, they did sit-ins where they would go to places where African Americans weren't normally allowed to go and force people to recognize them. A lot of that was restaurants. So they would sit there, and because it was non-violent, they didn't fight back, even if people were mean to them. They didn't fight back. They didn't fight back with their fists. They fought back with their minds and with their tenacious spirits. They were resilient. They stood there and they sat there and they endured it. Why? So that you can go to McDonald's, and when you want your chicken nuggets, and if you want to sit at the table and eat your chicken nuggets, you can eat your chicken nuggets and no one can tell you to move unless you've been there too long. But you can sit there in peace and eat your chicken nuggets and eat your french fries and play with your toys, and no one can tell you to move just because you're black. Okay? So that's what they were fighting for. And that was a very, very important thing that they did. All right? So now, let's look. I know it's going on a bit longer. So then, in 1964, Fannie Lou Hamer, as vice chairman of Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, speaks at Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And so in 1964, Fannie Lou Hamer, let me tell you, Fannie Lou Hamer wasn't the most educated, but she was strong and she was brave. And she fought hard to make sure that we had a voice in the Democratic Party because she was coming out of the South. And most of the Southern states were represented by the Democratic Party. And so she was like, we need to have a voice because they're making decisions for our states and they're making decisions about how we can live our life every single day. And we need to be a part of that decision making process. And so that was really important. And it was also the year that the Civil Rights Act the first Civil Rights Act was passed, and that's the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Can you say the Civil Rights Act of 1964? Civil Rights Act of 1964. Let's do it again. Civil Rights Act of 1964. Okay? So now let's look. Uh-oh. This is a little bit sad. Because in 1965, the man we once knew as Malcolm X but died as El Haj Malik Shabazz, he was assassinated. Usually that means that there's some kind of political implication. But he was assassinated on February 21st at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, New York. So he was getting ready to give a speech, and someone came in and did something really bad with a gun. They shot him and it killed him. That was a really sad time. In that year, Dr. Martin Luther King led a march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. And then later on that year, they also passed the Voting Rights Act. So by 1965, we had the Civil Rights Act and also the Voting Rights Act. So what we were seeing is that blacks were having some of these small victories in terms of, stopping Jim Crow and having sit-ins and stuff like that. It was challenging. But the victory came in when it forced Congress to say, hey, wait a minute, we need to get a law in the books to address this so that when someone's civil rights is violated, when the civil rights of a person are violated, or if a civil right is violated, they have some means of legal recourse because we have a civil society. We don't want retaliation. We don't want vigilante justice. We want people to be able to stand up and engage the legal process to achieve the outcomes that they desire. So that's just like when I tell you there's a democratic way for us to handle stuff when you're upset with me, not just about you having a tantrum and you're yelling and screaming, but you being able to say, okay, mommy, I don't agree with what you said because I think that I should be able to, and I tell you to use your words. It's the same thing. the government was saying, okay, let's create an opportunity for our citizens to be able to use their words and use the system to exact the change that they're looking for. Okay? So now, so again, in 1964, we had the Civil Rights Act, and then in 1965, that was a rough year. Malcolm X was assassinated that February. But then in March, Dr. Martin Luther King led the march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. And then later on that year, the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965. So now let's look at 1967. Do you remember that man who argued separate is not equal at the Supreme Court? Yep, so here he is, being his fantastic self. In 1967, Thurgood Marshall becomes the first African American Supreme Court justice. Yep. In 1967, Thurgood Marshall becomes the first African American Supreme Court justice. Do you know what that meant? He got to be a judge in the highest court of our country, because the Supreme Court justice, Supreme Court case, the Supreme Court is higher than any other court in our country. Okay, so it's a really, really, really big deal. So then in 1968, Martin Luther King Jr., this is sad, is assassinated on April 4th. So that's 3 years after Malcolm X, right? Excuse me, Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated on April 4th. Then, but that was really, really sad, and a lot of people were hurt. Shirley Chisholm, however, becomes the first black woman elected to Congress. Yep, the first black woman elected to Congress was Shirley Chisholm. Okay, first black woman elected to Congress was who? That's right, Shirley Chisholm. So in 1986, John Lewis, who helped start SNCC, is also elected to Congress, representing Georgia's 5th congressional district. So now, what's happening is all of this change is making it easier for blacks to have more representation in government, right? So that means, so again, in 1968, Shirley Chisholm becomes the first black woman elected to Congress, and then you invert the numbers. In 1986, John Lewis is elected to Congress, representing Georgia's 5th congressional district. In 2008, this is right before you were born, right before I got pregnant with you, actually. In 2008, Barack Obama is elected President of the United States on November 4th. Can you say that again? Barack Obama, in 2008, Barack Obama is elected President of the United States on November 4th. Okay? So those are some pretty important facts. Okay? And a lot went on. A lot had to happen in order for us to experience some of the freedom that we experience. Okay? So now, I want you to go get your pen and paper. Ooh, sorry. Go get your pen and paper. And even if you need to pause the video for a minute, what I'm going to have you do is, what do you have to do? That's right. Put a heading on your paper. So your name, your date, and the subject. We're doing social studies. Okay? Social studies and reading comprehension. So what you're specifically doing is being able to listen and recall facts. Okay? You're going to listen and recall facts. Okay? So what were we talking about today? Timelines. That's right. So I'm sorry that there's so much ambient noise, meaning there's so much noise in our surroundings, but I didn't get a private room and I just kind of am sitting out, so you can hear some noise in the background. We can pause it for a few minutes. Okay, I'm going to pause it for a few minutes and start it in a minute. Okay, so now we're going to continue with our assignment. Okay, and you have your name, your date, and your subject. Okay, so, you can also put the day. And so whatever day you're writing it, I'm recording this on Monday, January 6th, but you may be listening to it on a different day, but that's okay. So just write the day and the date that you're doing it, okay? So now let's look at this. Social studies timelines. All right, so now we're looking at civil rights, actually not civil rights leaders, we're looking at the civil rights movement, okay? So now, let's see. Okay, I'm going to read you the question, and then I'm going to wait for you to and give you some time to write it down. We have 5 questions to do. Okay? The first question: in what year did Abraham Lincoln issue the Emancipation Proclamation? In what year did Abraham Lincoln issue the Emancipation Proclamation? Let's say it one more time. In what year did Abraham Lincoln issue the Emancipation Proclamation? In what year did Abraham Lincoln issue the Emancipation Proclamation? Can you remember? Let's see. That was actually one of the first entries on our timeline. So I'm going to show it to you. Okay? I'll put it right here closer to. So do you see it? If it's the first entry on our timeline, where would it be? Right here. So what year is that? Can you see it? That's right. It's 1863. So in 1863, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. So if you're writing down your answers, again, you're going to take keywords from your question and put it into your response. So you would say, in 1863, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Okay? So in 1863, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Okay? What year was it? 1863. And what was the name of it? The Emancipation Proclamation. Okay? The Emancipation Proclamation. And that was following a very important war. That was the Civil War. Okay? Now, let's look at question number 2. Okay? What important civil rights event occurred in 1909? I'll repeat it again. What important civil rights event occurred in 1909? Did you hear me? I'll say it one more time. What important civil rights event occurred in 1909? Well, let's take a look back at our timeline. I'll put it close up here for you to see. Where would you be looking for the year? Right, we'll be looking right down here. Okay, so now, what year will we be looking for? 1909. So let's see. That's 1863, 1895, 1903. What does that say? That's right, 1909. What happened? I don't know. Let's see. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, meaning the NAACP, is formed. So N double A, so N 2 A's, CP is formed. So if I were answering that in a complete sentence, I would say the important event that occurred in 1909 is that the NAACP was formed. Okay, so I was able to take keywords from my question and put it into my response. So even if the teacher doesn't reread the question, based on your answer, she can understand the question that was asked. He or she can understand the question that was asked. Okay, so let's look at number 3. Okay. So, what important civil rights event occurred in 1909? The NAACP was formed. All right. In what year did Thurgood Marshall argue in the U.S. Supreme Court that separate facilities in education are unequal? So, in what year did Thurgood Marshall argue in the U.S. Supreme Court that separate facilities in education are unequal? So, what do we have to do? We have to take a look back at our timeline. So let's take a look back. And we're going to look here. This is where all the years. So we're going to keep looking down. Okay, let's keep looking. Here we talk about the Emancipation Proclamation. We know the NAACP was formed. We see CORE, Malcolm X, 1954. I see a mention of Thurgood Marshall. Do you see it? You do? So what is it talking about? That's right. So it says, in what year did Thurgood Marshall argue in the Supreme Court that separate is not equal? What year is that? Can you see it? Can you tell me what year that is? That's right. That's in 1954. In 1954. So that's incredibly important. In 1954. Okay. Okay. Now let's look. Let's look at our fourth question. Our fourth question is, in what year was the Civil Rights Act passed? Okay. In what year was the Civil Rights Act passed? In what year was the Civil Rights Act passed? Okay. So, and let's see. Let's look again. Look all the way. So we're looking for, so now instead of looking at the years, right, we have to look at the text or the narrative, okay, to figure out what the answers, to figure out the answer to our question. So we're looking for the Civil Rights Act. Well, here was the Montgomery bus boycott. Here's the Supreme Court ruling, the formation of the Southern Leadership Conference, Martin Luther King delivering his I Have a Dream speech. But then right here, look right down below here, right here, what does it say? What year is that? My bad. I wrote that down wrong too. Okay. Do you see it? You see right here? That's right. In 1964. Okay? In 1964. All right? So in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed. It's actually it's called the Civil Rights Act of 1964 because there have been subsequent acts passed with similar things. So that was in 1964. Okay? Let's look at our fifth and final question. In what year did Barack Obama get elected president? Let's see. That's all the way over here at the end of our timeline. And you can see it right here. That's what year? Fantastic. In 2008, Barack Obama was elected president. So now, to answer the question in a complete sentence, we would say that in 2008, Barack Obama was elected president of the United States. And then if number 4, the Civil Rights Act, the first Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. Okay? The Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. The Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. Okay? So, I'm certain your dad is reviewing this with you. Again, this book is the book that I used. It's the African American Collective Biographies, Inspiring African American Civil Rights Leader by Stephen Feinstein. Okay, Feinstein. So, yeah, it was actually on the mall. Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech, I believe. Well, they said it was at the Lincoln Memorial, but I always thought it was on the mall. But so the important thing to know is that it was in the center of Washington, D.C., and the reason why it was there and the reason why it's important to note that it was here is because it created a sense of urgency for the country to make a change, to see that many people devoted to not only supporting, but enduring whatever challenge and whatever strategy was set forth to ensure that Black people were received the equality that they deserved as citizens of this country was a critical objective. And so they would not sit still and just sit quietly while the United States kind of turned a blind eye to some of the things that were going on. So it's important to see how much we've grown as a country, how much we're still growing, and how much we will grow because we have beautiful, 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 intelligent scholars just like you who will not put down the helm and who will continue to stand up on the shoulders of those who came before them to ensure that freedom and equality continues. Freedom, equality, and equity continues. And I'm so proud of you for that. So I love you. I love you. I love you. I appreciate you and I honor you. I hope you have a truly blessed day, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.